I've been wanting to try my hand at doing another creature sculpture for a while, so what I'm going to do is take some Chavant oil clay, and because this stuff can be quite hard initially, what I'm going to do is put it in the oven at about 60 degrees centigrade, let it soften up a little so it's much more easier to handle, then I'm going to start sculpting up a bust. So that's been in for about 20 minutes, half an hour or so, and now it's nice and soft. It's not too hot. You've got to be a bit careful with this stuff. If you make it too hot, it's a little bit like napalm as it sticks to you and burns you. But if you have it about 60 degrees, that's not too bad, and it leaves the clay nice and soft and easy to manipulate. So I'm initially using some foil just to bulk out the main shape on my armature here. And now I'm just blocking out a rough form for the beginning of the sculpture. One of the reasons I'm doing this is because my most recent sculpture was a large 1:1 scale silicon statue, which you may have seen on my channel. And this was cast up in dragon skin silicon, and I've been wanting to try that stuff for quite a while because you can get some very realistic results with it. And I think this has got a real degree of realism to it, so I was very pleased about the way this came out. Now I do a few exhibitions here and there throughout the year, and when people come up to my stand they often look at sculptures very closely, I guess to try and take in some of the detail. But I've always thought it'd be quite good fun if I had a sculpture that could actually move and that had a motion sensor in it, so when someone comes up very close and looks at it, the sculpture suddenly looks at them and scares them. So I thought that would be quite an amusing thing to do for the exhibition. Now, one of my previous projects let me experiment a little bit with an Arduino and some servos, and I've also previously done some mechanisms for cable control as well, so I think I've got all of the elements in place to enable me to do basically an animatronic puppet. So what I'm trying to do with this sculpture is just come up with a basic idea of what that could look like. Now this isn't going to be the final piece, this is just a sketch to help me try out some ideas, but I do plan to develop this into a full-size 1:1 animatronic puppet. I must admit I didn't really have much of an idea of what this would be when I went into it. I did initially think about doing an orc type character perhaps, but as things started progressing this guy started looking a little bit more like a fish man. Now this was before Shape of Water came out, so this was sort of entirely coincidental. Nevertheless I sort of lost my way with it a little bit and ended up putting it on a shelf for a few months. I often find though that sculptures develop as I work, so often I'll start off with one idea, and as the sculpture progresses it gives me new ideas as I go, so oftentimes I'll start with one idea and end up with something completely different by the end, and that's very much what happened here. So with this I'm just trying to follow the contours of the clay that have sort of developed naturally, so as you can see I'm sort of tracing shapes around the cheeks and the eyebrows and trying to link those shapes together. You always want to keep a basis of the human form in there, but you want to sort of change those elements around a bit to try and come up with something that looks a bit different. I found myself experimenting with various shapes and looks, so here I'm just adding some sort of protrusions to the forehead just to see how they would look. I've also tried adding a sort of a head projection type thing here as well, but nothing was really standing out to me. One thing I've also tried doing is to experiment with the size of the eyes in a sculpture. Now at the minute it's got quite small eyes, but I think larger eyes tend to make things maybe look a little bit more friendly and expressive, so I'm just trying to put some larger eyes in here as well. The last thing I tried was to put an eye in the centre of the forehead as well, but again this wasn't really working, and as you can see I've got a mishmash of ideas here, so in the end I sort of put it aside for a while. Now we had a little bit of a snowy spell in the UK, which is a little bit unusual for us, so I was just going to take a quick video of it through the window. Anyway, as I came back into the front room I noticed my fiance's skull collection on the side, so that gave me the idea that perhaps I could add some horns to the sculpture instead. I've used these ram's horns previously to make a mould, and as you can see here I've made a headdress out of them. These are just out of slush cast resin, so they're quite light. They do look rather cool, so I thought maybe that idea could be added to my sculpture. But perhaps a slightly more goatee sort of devilly look to the sculpture will help, so I think that's probably something to try. So I've just taken a curved bit of wire and added some clay to it to create a basic horn shape, and I can just push that into the top of the sculpture with some pliers. So given that I want this to be an animatronic creature that will be seen in exhibitions, I figured that it would need some large expressive eyes. I'm kind of thinking this could be the sort of thing you may have seen in the Labyrinth perhaps. So I wanted to have large eyes that are quite expressive so that people can easily read the expression of the puppet. And given that it's going to have a sort of a centaur type look, I've started building the forehead up as well to give it a sort of a prominent brow. Now, we popped down to Cornwall for a few days, and when I was down there I actually picked up these ram's horns as well. Now, the sculpture I'm working on is really just a concept. It's not going to be the final piece. The final piece is going to be full scale. So I figured I could actually add these horns to that 1:1 scale piece when I finally get around to making it. Now, they're a little bit heavy, so I think I'll actually need to make a mould and to cast them up in something lighter, but I think they'll add a real degree of authenticity to it when I eventually get around to making it. And they're also a great reference for the sculpture I'm working on at the minute. So I was able to work on this a little bit while I was down in Cornwall, and I was also working on it in the car journey back. As you can see, I've been working on the right hand side of the face here and just trying to smooth out those lines. They're still not looking entirely organic to me, but I'm sort of getting somewhere closer, I think. It's a bit of drive back from Cornwall, so it's always nice to do a bit of sculpture. It does bounce about a bit, but if you balance it on your chest, it's not too bad. That was quite a nice way to pass the journey, actually, other than the brief interruption of Stonehenge here, as you can see. Once I was back, I found this video on Facebook of this weird looking goat. After a bit of research, it turns out that this is what's called a Damascus goat, and they've got this really interesting look to their face. So I thought maybe I could add some elements of this creature into the sculpture, and it gave me some good reference for some neck details. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm redoing the neck slightly to hopefully make it look a little bit more organic. I think some of the shapes that I had previously were a little bit too blocky and didn't really look quite as organic as they could, so I've been working on that, and hopefully, as you can see, that's looking a little bit more lifelike. I've also changed the ear from a pointy ear to a sort of a folded goat type ear. That's also from the Damascus goat video as well. Looks a little bit more unusual, I think, so I quite like that. So using the reference for the horns that I bought down in Cornwall, I've made a second horn there for the right hand side of the face. That's got much more of a curl to it than the other one that's already on there, so I need to adjust the previous horn to look similar. Here I'm just chopping off one of the shoulders. I think having the shoulders there just made him look a little bit too stationary, if you see what I mean. So I'm going to remove that and have the shoulders look like they're sloping down a little bit more, just to make it look maybe a little bit less human, and that maybe gives it a little bit more of an organic look perhaps. I'm also changing the clavicle to point downwards as well. I think maybe that just looks a little bit more unusual perhaps, I'm not sure, but I think it adds something. Now that I've cut a bunch of texture detail into the clay using my loop tool, I'm now using some white spirit and a paintbrush to smooth it all down. This melts the clay slightly and lets you smooth out hard edges on the detail so you can get a nice organic look to the skin texture. So there's my finished sculpture. As I mentioned, this is only a sketch, so I hopefully plan to build a full-size version of this with some casts of these horns attached as well. So I think that could look quite realistic, particularly if I were to add some hair and realistic skin texture and all that sort of stuff. So I'm quite looking forward to having a go at that. I'm not quite sure when I'll get around to it, and also there'll be a bit of a cost involved, I think, because dragon skin silicon isn't cheap, and neither are servos and electronics and all that sort of stuff. Nevertheless, it's something I've been thinking about doing for quite a while, so I'll probably try and start that this year. One more thing before I go, I thought it might be fun to try the lower sort of mouth of the Damascus goat on this, and as you can see, it sort of made the sculpture look a little bit more goaty and a little bit less devilly, so I think it might be quite fun to sort of play around with different looks for this sort of thing to see what I can come up with. The previous version perhaps looked a little bit like the devil from Legend, the movie, so it might be a good idea to shy away from that perhaps. So anyway, just another thought, another variation on a theme, but I'll see what I come up with when I get round to doing the final version. But for the time being, it's been fun to do another creature, so thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Thanks very much for watching. I'll be posting videos on future projects, so if you'd like to keep up with what's going on, please do subscribe. Alternatively, you can visit my website, which is www.thedarkpower.com, or you can find me on Facebook, just search for The Dark Power.